Did you know that a single translation completely changed how two of the world's largest religions view God and still sparks explosive debates today? The Septuagint, created over 2,000 years ago, wasn't just a translation of sacred texts. It was the starting point for some of history's biggest religious controversies. Imagine this: a text that was supposed to unite cultures and preserve traditions ended up creating divisions so deep they still resonate. This story begins in the magnificent city of Alexandria, with a king obsessed with gathering all human knowledge and 70 scholars tasked with translating the sacred scriptures of the Jewish people into Greek. But here's the shocker. This translation didn't just adapt the text, it altered key meanings that would shape Christianity, put Judaism on the defensive, and raise a question no one has fully answered to this day. Which text is closer to God? If that question has already piqued your curiosity, don't forget to hit the like button so more people can uncover this story. Subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this with a friend who loves history and religious debates. And let me know in the comments, what country are you watching from? Now, let's dive into the story of the translation that shook the world. Let's cut straight to it. The Septuagint is no ordinary translation. Created between the 3rd and 2nd centuries BCE, it's the first known translation of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. But this wasn't just a simple linguistic exercise, it was a groundbreaking event that opened the sacred texts of Judaism to a wider audience in a world dominated by Hellenistic culture. Imagine taking texts rooted in centuries of tradition and adapting them for a world that spoke and thought in Greek. It was bold, ambitious, and yes, controversial. The name Septuagint comes necessary. By that time, many Jewish communities in the diaspora, especially in Egypt, no longer spoke Hebrew fluently. Greek was the lingua franca, the universal language of trade, culture, and diplomacy. Without a Greek translation, a significant part of the Jewish population risked losing access to their own sacred texts. The Septuagint wasn't just for Jews, though. Its availability in Greek made the scriptures accessible to non-Jews interested in the faith and, from the Latin word for 70, referring to the 70 or 72 Jewish scholars who, according to legend, worked on this translation in Alexandria, Egypt. The story goes that each scholar translated the entire text independently, and when they compared their work, it matched perfectly, word for word. Divine intervention or myth? That depends on who you ask. Either way, it highlights the reverence and mystique surrounding this project. Now, why was it philosophy of the Jewish people? It became a bridge between cultures, spreading the ethical and spiritual teachings of Judaism to the broader Hellenistic world. But here's where the story takes a turn. That same bridge would later become a battlefield for theological disputes. As we unravel this journey, you'll see how this ambitious translation set the stage for one of the biggest controversies in religious history. But before we dive into the conflicts, let's examine how the text of the Septuagint differed from its Hebrew counterpart and why those differences matter so much. Here's where things start to heat up. The Septuagint, though revered for its accessibility, doesn't perfectly align with the Masoretic text, the Hebrew Bible that became the standard for Judaism. These discrepancies might seem minor at first glance, but they've sparked centuries of debate and division. The big question? Did the translators preserve a variant, a translation choice, or evidence of divine foreshadowing? Then there's the book of Isaiah, another hotspot for controversy. In Isaiah 7:14, the Masoretic text uses the Hebrew word alma, meaning young woman. However, the Septuagint translates this as parthenos, which specifically means virgin. This seemingly small choice of words became foundational for Christianity's teaching of the virgin birth of Jesus. Jews argue that this is a mistranslation, the divine message, or did they unintentionally, or perhaps intentionally, alter its meaning? One of the most striking differences can be found in Psalm 22:16. In the Masoretic text, the Hebrew phrase describes something like a lion at my hands and feet. But in the Septuagint, this phrase becomes, they pierced my hands and my feet, a rendering that Christians have interpreted as a prophecy of Jesus' crucifixion. The stakes here are massive. Is this a textual, whether edits were made during the translation process? The impact of these variations goes beyond theology. It's about identity. For Judaism, the Masoretic text became the cornerstone of tradition, preserving the language and structure of the scriptures. For Christianity, the Septuagint, particularly its Greek phrasing, was seen as a gateway to understanding Christ's role in fulfilling prophecy. And here's the kicker. Modern scholarship has uncovered ancient Hebrew, while Christians view it as a divinely inspired revelation. This isn't just semantics, it's a theological tug-of-war. But the differences aren't limited to key verses. Entire books in the Septuagint include additional content or phrasing not found in the Masoretic text. For example, the book of Jeremiah in the Septuagint is significantly shorter than its Hebrew counterpart. Why? Scholars debate whether the translators worked from an earlier, shorter Hebrew text or manuscripts like those found in the Dead Sea Scrolls that sometimes align more closely with the Septuagint than the Masoretic text. This discovery raises even more questions. Which text is closer to the original? Was the Septuagint based on an alternative Hebrew tradition now lost? These differences are far from resolved, and they've set the stage for intense theological and historical debates. But these debates are just the beginning. Next, we'll delve into how one of these differences, Isaiah 7:14, became a flashpoint for one of the biggest controversies between Judaism and Christianity. Here's where the story takes a sharp turn into controversy. Isaiah 7:14 is not just a verse, it's a battlefield. In the Hebrew Masoretic text, this prophecy states, "Behold, the young woman Alma shall conceive and bear a son." The term Alma simply means a young woman of marriageable age, with no explicit implication of virginity. But in the Septuagint, the translators used the Greek word parthenos, which specifically means virgin. This single word change would become a cornerstone of Christian theology and ignite a lasting theological dispute. For Christians, this translation is monumental. It's cited in the Gospel of Matthew 1:23 to validate the virgin birth of Jesus, presenting him as the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. To the early church, the Septuagint wasn't just a translation, it was evidence of divine planning, proving Jesus' messianic identity. But to Jewish scholars, this rendering was seen as, at best, an error, and at worst, an intentional reinterpretation to fit a Christian narrative. The stakes here aren't just theological, they're existential. For Christianity, the Septuagint's interpretation of Isaiah 7:14 affirms Jesus as the Messiah. For Judaism, this reinterpretation represents a deviation from the original meaning, reaction, affecting everything from theology to interfaith relations. Even today, scholars and religious leaders grapple with this verse. Was the Septuagint capturing a deeper spiritual truth missed by the Hebrew text? Or was it shaped by the translator's biases and the context of their time? And what about those ancient Hebrew manuscripts discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls that sometimes align with the Septuagint? Could they be clues to a forgotten tradition? Of the text, the tension is palpable, with each side standing firm on their understanding of what God intended to communicate. Let's pause and consider the broader implications. This isn't just about one word, It's about authority. Which text, Hebrew or Greek, carries the true weight of divine inspiration? The Septuagint, by translating Alma as Parthenos, brought the text into the cultural and linguistic context of its time. But in doing so, it set off a chain. Isaiah 7:14 is more than a verse. It's a lens through which we see how translations can shape entire belief systems. And as we explore how the Septuagint added entire books to its canon, the question of its authority and purpose only grows more complex. If you thought the translation of key verses like Isaiah 7:14 stirred enough controversy, wait until you hear about the books the Septuagint included that weren't in the Hebrew scriptures. These additional texts, now referred to as the deuterocanonical books, include works like Tobit, Judith, Wisdom of Solomon, Sirach, and 1 and 2 Maccabees. For some, these books are an integral part of the Bible. For others, they're outright rejected. But how did these texts end up in the Septuagint in the first place? The Jewish scriptures, as preserved in Hebrew, didn't originally include these books. However, many of them were written during the Hellenistic period, often in Greek. Theological insights that resonated deeply with Christian communities. Wisdom of Solomon, for example, contains passages interpreted as messianic prophecies, while Maccabees provides a vivid account of Jewish resistance against Hellenistic oppression, inspiring themes of faith and martyrdom. But the inclusion of these books created a rift that persists to this day. By the 1st century CE, Jewish communities began consolidating their scriptural canon, reflecting the cultural and religious challenges faced by Jews living in a world dominated by Greek thought and language. The Septuagint translators, working in Alexandria, incorporated these writings into their collection, treating them as sacred alongside the Torah and prophets. For centuries, the Septuagint, including the deuterocanonical books, was the Bible of the early church. These books offered profound moral teachings, historical narratives, and deuterocanonical books, likely due to their origins in the Hellenistic world and their absence from earlier Hebrew traditions. This decision was cemented after the rise of Christianity, as these books were widely used to support Christian theology. The divide only deepened during the Protestant Reformation. Reformers like Martin Luther rejected the deuterocanonical books, labeling them apocrypha, or non-canonical texts. Meanwhile, the Catholic Church reaffirmed their inclusion at the Council of Trent, solidifying the split between Catholic and Protestant Bibles. These books are more than just an academic debate. They represent a fundamental question of authority. Who decides what belongs in the Bible? And how did these texts, embraced by some and rejected by others, shape the theology and identity of entire traditions? As we explore the rejection of the Septuagint by Jewish communities, the implications of this inclusion, challenges, the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE marked a pivotal moment, forcing leaders to consolidate and define their faith. As part of this process, the Jewish canon was established, and the Septuagint's Greek version of the scriptures was excluded. One major reason was the growing association of the Septuagint with Christianity. Early Christians had adopted the Septuagint as their Bible, often citing it to prove Jesus' messianic role, especially in Become Even Clearer. The story of the Septuagint takes a dramatic turn, with its rejection by Jewish communities and simultaneous adoption by Christians. What began as a tool for preserving Jewish tradition in the Greek-speaking world quickly became a source of tension, division, and theological debate. But why did the Jewish people, who had initially embraced the Septuagint, turn their backs on it? By the 1st century CE, Jewish communities were facing enormous passages like Isaiah 7:14 and Psalm 22:16. This Christian usage of the Septuagint created deep unease among Jewish leaders. They saw it as a text being weaponized to promote a new faith that diverged from their own. To reclaim their sacred texts and resist what they perceived as misinterpretations, Jewish authorities reaffirmed the authority of the Hebrew Scriptures, eventually forming what is now known as the Masoretic text. Meanwhile, for Christians, the Septuagint became a vital tool for spreading their message to the Hellenistic world. Its Greek language and interpretations resonated with non-Jews, providing a theological foundation for the early church. Over time, the Septuagint symbolized the parting of ways between Judaism and Christianity. This rejection wasn't merely about language, it was about identity, authority, and survival. And as the Septuagint became the backbone of Christian scripture, its legacy as understanding the origins of the Bible and the evolution of religious thought. For scholars, the Septuagint is a goldmine of historical insight. It offers a window into how Jewish communities in the Hellenistic period understood their own scriptures. Variants found in the Septuagint sometimes align with the Dead Sea Scrolls, suggesting that the Hebrew text we know today wasn't the only version circulating in antiquity. This discovery has fueled debates over which a point of division was cemented. Next, we'll explore how the Septuagint remains relevant today, sparking debates and shaping theology in ways you might not expect. The story of the Septuagint didn't end with its adoption by Christianity or its rejection by Judaism. It continues to influence theological debates, academic research, and religious practices to this day. Far from being a relic of the past, the Septuagint remains a vital piece of the puzzle foundational for Orthodox liturgy and doctrine. Meanwhile, Western Christianity, influenced by the Protestant Reformation, often questions the Septuagint's authority, particularly because of its inclusion of the deuterocanonical books. Beyond theology, the Septuagint raises questions about the power of translation. Every translation, no matter how faithful, involves interpretation. This unavoidable reality reminds us that religious texts are not static, they evolve. And text, the Septuagint or the Masoretic, is closer to the original. Did the Septuagint preserve an older tradition lost in the Hebrew canon? Or were its translators influenced by the Greek culture of their time? In Christian theology, the Septuagint remains central to certain traditions. The Eastern Orthodox Church, for example, still uses the Septuagint as its official Old Testament. Many of its interpretations, especially those connected to messianic prophecies, and interpretation remain unresolved. The Septuagint is more than just an ancient text. It's a symbol of the dynamic, sometimes contentious, relationship between tradition and innovation. As we conclude this journey, one question lingers. How has this ancient translation shaped not just religions, but the way we view the power of words themselves? The Septuagint is no ordinary translation. It's a bridge that connected worlds, but also a fault line that created, adapt, and sometimes divide. The Septuagint serves as a testament to how a single translation can shape the beliefs of billions, even as it sparks disagreement. Modern debates also extend to interfaith dialogue. Some Jewish scholars have re-examined the Septuagint to better understand its historical context, while Christians continue to explore its significance in validating their theological claims. Yet the tensions persist, as questions of authority, authenticity, interpretation, the Septuagint's impact is undeniable. It's a reminder that the words we choose can shape history, and sometimes they can even divide it. But here's the real question: what can we learn from it? The Septuagint teaches us that translations are never neutral. They carry the weight of culture, context, and belief. And as we reflect on this, perhaps we should ask ourselves, how do the words we use shape the way we understand the world, and even God? Now, lasting divisions. It introduced the sacred texts of Judaism to a Greek-speaking world, opening doors to understanding and at the same time raising questions that still challenge scholars, theologians, and believers today. Think about it. This translation influenced the foundations of Christianity, divided the biblical canons of major religious traditions, and continues to fuel debates over authority and authenticity. Whether seen as a divine tool or a human, it's your turn. What do you think about the power of the Septuagint? Leave a comment below and let me know from which country you're watching. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on more thought-provoking stories like this one. Share this video with a friend who loves history, and let's keep this conversation alive.